don't see the blue button.
All right, we are ready to begin. Hello and welcome everybody to the Abbe Museum's virtual programming today. Before going any further before introducing our guest today, I would like to acknowledge the land from which the Abbe Museum is broadcasting today by reading our land acknowledgement. We are in the homeland of the Wabanaki, the people of the Dawn. We extend our respect and gratitude to the many Indigenous peoples and their ancestors whose rich histories and vibrant communities include the Abenaki, Maliseet, Micmac, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot Nations, and all of the Native communities that have lived here for thousands of generations in what is now known today as Maine, New England, and the Canadian Maritimes. We make this acknowledgement aware of the continual violations of water, territorial rights, and sacred sites in the Wabanaki homeland. The Abbe is honored to collaborate with the Wabanaki as they share their stories. And again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. We're really pleased to have a program brought to you by Carol Dana, Margo Lukens, and Conor Quinn. And they will be talking about their upcoming book, Still They Remember Me, Penobscot Transformer Tales. Carol Dana is a Penobscot language master for the Penobscot Nation. Margo Lukens is a professor of English at the University of Maine, and Conor Quinn is an adjunct assistant professor of linguistics at the University of Southern Maine. We're really fortunate to have you all with us today for this very special program. And without further ado, I will be handing over the platform to you all so that you can share with us about your book. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Star. And thanks to everybody at the Abbe for making this possible. We're going to start with a little bit of a slideshow, and Carol and I, and maybe even Conor, are going to leap in to narrate for you to give you a little bit of background. And after that, we're going to have Carol talk a bit, and then Conor and Carol's going to read a story to wrap it up. So without further ado, I'm sharing the screen.
Then after that, Q&A, right?
Q&A, plenty of Q&A. So start thinking of your cues. Thank you. So our thought about this being a reissue of Penobscot language stories for the 21st century is really what we wanted to talk to you all about today. And the person that we want to foreground in the book that we're publishing, oops, why can't I change the slide? There it is Newell Lyon. And he's the storyteller who had learned all of these Penobscot Transformer Tales from elders in the community and had become himself a keeper of the stories. And by the time the anthropologist Frank Speck arrived at Indian Island in about 1910 to learn something about the Penobscot language and people's culture and the stories they were telling, he was already about our age. Carol and I were just talking about this. He was in his mid-60s. He was a woodsman by trade, and with Speck, he helped write down and translate a whole raft of stories, some about Gluskabe, the culture hero of Penobscot Nation, and some about other important figures. And Speck published 21 of these stories in a brand new journal and in 1918 called the International Journal of American Linguistics. This journal was really aimed at a very narrow audience of scholars of Indigenous American languages back in the turn of the 20th century, and did not expect that Native people would consult it or that a popular audience would consult it. And so what we're doing today is really turning to very different audiences to bring these stories back into currency. So the way this began to happen, in 2015, there was a plan afoot for a celebration of the centennial of Acadia National Park. And the park centennial would be 2016, and the park organizers had gone around to various cultural institutions in the state and asked about programming that might match the theme of the centennial of Acadia National Park. And they came to Penobscot Theater in Bangor, which is the professional theater company there. And the artistic director at the time was interested in finding out more about Penobscot people and about what was the relationship of the name of the theater to the tribes. And so she said, we don't have anything yet, but let me get back to you. And she began by consulting Donna Loring, who is a Penobscot writer and former representative to the Maine state legislature, who also knew that people in Indian Island had done a lot of work with stories and converting stories into plays. And so she suggested that the theater talk to me and talk to people in the Penobscot Nation who'd been working on community theater. That was my particular role there. And so Carol Dana and about 6 other people interested in making sure that whatever happened on the stage of the Penobscot Theater really reflected Penobscot Nation in a way they wanted it to, got together and began working in the fall of 2015 to create a script. And eventually the basis for the script that we settled on was something that Carol brought to our attention, which was these old stories that had been published in 1918 in this obscure linguistics journal, told by Newell Lyon, Penobscot man, to Frank Speck. And so eventually we realized that yes, in fact, the first 13 of the stories in that publication make a beautiful story arc. And they tell not only the story of the childhood and maturing of Gluskabe, the culture hero, but in the process of his growth and achievements, what you learn is the deep and family connections between Penobscot people and the land and the water around the Don land. So this slide is a picture of a scene from the play as it was performed in August 2016, Transformer Tales play. Gluskabe on the left is talking to Aglabemo, the frog, and the frog has held back all the water from the people, and the people are all thirsty and dying of that thirst. And Gluskabe has to try various means of persuasion and struggle and wrestling, and finally he fells a yellow birch tree on the frog, and the frog lets the water all out, and the water that spills out of the frog becomes the Penobscot River. And one of the important things about the story is that some of the thirsty people who all jump in to drink and frolic in the water, some of them never come out of the water. They become creatures who live in the water. And from that time on, Penobscot people have identified family clans by names of water creatures. And so the abiding family relationship of Penobscot people with the creatures of the river itself is, figured forth in that story. Here's an example of Gluskabe again on the left, and his grandmother, Minimquasu, the woodchuck, on the right. And the words on the screen, she is saying to him, are how they appear in the script. Our script, because Carol was really careful with this and helped guide us to make sure that there was Penobscot language just about every page. And we managed to set the Penobscot words in a way that an English-speaking audience could hear the Penobscot words and then receive an immediate translation so that the flow and their understanding would be right there. Gluskabe in this particular story has asked his grandmother to make him a bag to bring home all the game that he kills. And so she does. She makes a magical game bag out of her own fur. And it's so magical that when he goes out to the forest, he doesn't even have to hunt. He just has to tell the animals a fib that the world is ending, but if they come into his game bag, they don't have to see it. And the magical game bag expands to make it possible for him to bring them all home. So when he comes home and reveals that he's taken all of the animals, she just, expresses her displeasure with them. You did not do a good thing at all, my grandchild. So here we are. The play gave rise immediately to work on the book. Carol said to me right after we'd finished the performances of the play, she said, Margo, we have to republish these stories. And we began working right then in the fall of 2015. Maybe it's a little out of order. This is though how we have carried on our work for the last year and a half since the pandemic. Carol and me and Conor in our various home environments. And in some ways it really let us bring the whole thing into being. Because we had done lots of work before that, but getting the last push of, final version to the press, copy editing, then the looking at the page proofs and making sure that all the illustrations and the maps were right. All of that took place during the pandemic. And so, in fact, the book is supposed to be out this month sometime from University of Massachusetts Press. And we got very excited the other day. We were looking on the web for the title, Still They Remember Me. And we found indications that it is available around the world. This is an example of Taiwan. We found it in New Zealand. We found it in the UK. We found it in Ghana. And so we're hopeful that Penobscot stories are going to have wide circulation. And we were just very amused to find that it was so already out there. The web is a marvelous thing. So we wanted to give you an example of the old version. And this is what, when Carol said, Margo, we have to republish these stories. This is the old version that she's talking about. This is just one page out of the first story in the cycle of Gluskabe's childhood and growing. And what it gives you is Frank Speck's best guess at at what the sounds of Penobscot are, so that somebody like him, an ethnolinguist, could maybe read the words on the top line, and below those are the literal translations. And then at the end of each of the stories, there are 13 stories that we've taken from this publication and done in our book. He puts the translations, the free translation in English, at the end of each story. So it's a quite inconvenient way of going between languages. Carol, did you want to say something about how this works for readers, or didn't work for readers?
Well, I'm not sure because, I told Star earlier, we had done some of the plays in school, but I just made cards for people, like cue cards. And I didn't really teach them to read, but they would read them on the spot and know what their line is. I haven't had much feedback specifically about this setup, but I want to mention my reasons for doing it is because it talks about power, and a lot of what the stories are about is conservation, the environment, living in balance, and how important the grandmother is to our culture because she does all the teaching for Gluskabe as he grows up. And she even asked her to make a canoe, bow and arrows, what she does, and she complies with his request and he with hers. When he comes home, she'll tell him what problem is with the community of the people and what they are having to go through, and then he'll set out to bring it to balance. So I like that, and how it worked for me. Every time I hear it, I relate to maybe a saying like Musa Sahi Gotch, don't worry, she tells him, or he tells her on one of his journeys, or Gani Galoda Gwenas, I have great confidence in you, or Gadi Ginhando. So that's how I absorb the stories. And I think, with repetition, you come to know them. And that's what's happened as a result of some of this, is that we've done storytelling at my home, and I do it at the Bangor Public Library. So there's more distribution of stories.
Yeah.
So it's been fun. I've enjoyed all this immensely.
Well, it has been fun. And one thing that was so cool about the plays, having the play at Penobscot Theater, was that there was, Penobscot language being spoken by some of the kids were Penobscot, some of them were not. Many of them were not Penobscot, but they all had to learn the language. And Carol was their language teacher in the rehearsals, and helped them all figure out how to write the stories phonetically. This is before we had the book, so that they could all learn it. And she also recorded each of the Penobscot lines for them so they could listen at home. It was just really thrilling to have the stories be the center of the attention of a theater audience.
Yes, because I remember what was going on at the time in the press was bad public relations about our people. And I had read somewhere, if you want to get to know a people, become familiar with their folk tales. And I thought this was a great opportunity. So that's kind of where I come from in all this also.
Yeah. Yes. And there's so many, really good messages for all kinds of people about thinking ahead to your descendants and making sure that life will be possible for them in whatever way, and keeping your activities in balance.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a picture that was taken. Carol and I were working on getting funding to support the activities of writing the book, and we met every Thursday morning at Tim Hortons in Old Town before it closed. And it was the most hospitable environment. It was so, nice and friendly and not too busy. So I guess that was part of the reason that it closed. But boy, they were so good to us.
Yeah.
But you'll see that Carol has in front of her the photocopy of the old version. That's what we're starting from and trying to, make a leap ahead of. And so just one more thing about the grandmother. You emphasized the grandmother. And when we were talking about this book with Lisa Brooks, our friend who teaches at Amherst College. She's Wabanaki, and she also is on the editorial board at UMass Press. And she said, the grandmother stories, Minim Kwasu is so important. And there's a way that Christianity at Indian Island and probably in other Native communities, in a way comes in through the grandmother, right? St. Anne's Church is St. Anne is the grandmother of Jesus. And so, it's interesting to think about that choice and maybe it's a syncretic moment where Minim Kwasu, who's already the bearer of all the wisdom, and St. Anne get kind of blended in one. So here's a moment where we're back to this slide of the end of the first story, where Gluskabe has come home having killed a big animal, and it turns out it's a bear, a weswes. And at the top of the left-hand column, you see, she said, grandson, a great beast, killed bear. Quinnas kichi awas nechelat awesus. Nagasibi nigup golauzinena mzela bami gulich. Gulich, sorry. You could do it better, Carol. But we wanted to show you, keep this page in mind. The very next slide is the same text laid out in the way that our book is laid out. And we'll show you another story a little later. Carol's going to read to you. But this is how our new book looks. See, right down the middle is the spine of the book. On the left hand is the Penobscot, and underneath each line of Penobscot, each of the words of the Penobscot sentence are laid out. And then across the spine on the right-hand side is the free translation of English at the top, and then what's laid out below each line is the literal translation of the Penobscot across the spine from it. Literal as close as we can get.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea here is that somebody trying to learn the language, and I know Connor's going to speak more about this, would be able much more easily to see where the Penobscot and in English are lined up, and be able to begin to read the Penobscot with expression, with a sense of meaning. If they're coming, say, from an Anglophone situation, which is true for most people today, that they'd be able to find their way from an English understanding back to a Penobscot understanding.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We were very fortunate. We had got some great advice from Gabe Paul, who is another language keeper at Penobscot Nation, who suggested that we do a kind of call to the community for illustrations of the book. And what we have here is two different illustrations for two different stories. The frog on the right, that's Aglabemu, and on the left is the grandmother, Manimkwasu, the woodchuck, being tormented by a group of nasty foxes. And the call for illustrations was answered by a number of people, and we got a really beautiful grasshopper from Josh Woodbury, but most of the illustrations came from one young woman, Shannon Sokolexis, and all along she was really responsive to our requests. She obviously read the stories very carefully and worked on interpreting the meanings of the actions that she was depicting. The grandmother picture, the grandmother woodchuck, really, it started out being a very human-looking woodchuck, and it took a number of revisions to get to this very woodchuck-looking woodchuck who's wearing a peaked Penobscot cap, probably a birch bark or cloth cap, of the kind that you wear it, to keep the rain or other kinds of weather off of you. And it's especially appropriate in this case because what she's suffering from at the moment in the story is that these foxes are coming to her door and pretending to be Gluskabe. She comes out looking for him and they pee on her. So the addition of the cap is really a beautiful touch, and it's very important to the story, actually. Here we go.
For just one sec about those.
You want to go back?
Not necessarily, but just to highlight that so many of the pictures that Shannon has done, there are details upon details sort of hiding in the background that really highlight some pieces of the story or some pieces of Penobscot culture. That is just an amazing, wonderful part of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like underline that point.
Yes.
They go far beyond just sort of illustrating stuff. They have little treasures almost hidden within them in lots of corners, especially for kids who are coming from a Penobscot background.
Right. For example, the cap and the designs of double curve all over the cap are very, very consistent with Penobscot tradition.
For protection.
Mm. Yeah. So eventually, Carol and I managed to get some good grant support from the Maine Community Foundation Broad Reach Fund. And one of the things that we specified the grant should pay for is a copy of the book for every Penobscot household. And so that's something we're really excited about. And now we just have to figure out how to get them to everybody because not everybody lives on Indian Island. But there are lots of potential audiences, we figure, for the book, including everyone in this list, readers from other communities of Indigenous people. We're hoping that educators in Maine K-12 schools and early childhood will all be using the book. Faith communities who want to learn more, conservation communities, because all of these stories tell a lot about Penobscot views of existence in this place, the Dawn Land, where we all live, and contain, very deep lessons about the right ways to conserve and preserve the balance. Any Maine citizens who want to find out more about who Penobscot people are and what deep beliefs and stories are. Scholars of Native American literatures, I know from my own work, there are going to be lots of people interested there. And of course, linguists, because the work Conor has done is very illuminating, and he'll tell us more about the specific interest pieces for linguists. We deliberately made the book in a way that we're hoping the youngest audiences will be attracted to it. The least specialized audiences will be able to use it. And also people who want to learn more at a more specialized level will also be able to learn. So, and this is what the cover looks like.
Yeah, we want to say a little bit about Newell Lyon, but we couldn't find too much information on him except that he lived in Winterport. I think Camilla was his mother, and his family background has some Huron in it, I believe, or was it Ojibwe? But he was known as the raconteur, and he did a lot of the storytelling with the help of his elders in the community. You know, when he told the stories to Frank Speck. And
Right.
He died a year after they were published.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, he was hunting somewhere near Alton and froze in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
So we want also to just say thanks, you know, thinking of Newell Lyon and our old guy Frank Speck also, but really great thanks to the people from Penobscot Nation and other Wabanaki communities who have guided us and taught us, each of us in our own way, how to do this work. We have other presentations about the book coming up. We're going to be doing them by Zoom, one later this month for a conference on stabilizing Indigenous languages, and then the American Philosophical Society has a tentatively scheduled one for the fall. That talk, the American Philosophical Society, is happening because that's where the original manuscripts that Frank Speck used, his typed manuscripts, are lodged there, and also the photograph of Newell Lyon. So all of Speck's papers are there.
Yes. And that's where you found the 8 or 9 stories we didn't know we had, right?
Right. So yes, that's
in the second volume.
right. I'm going to stop sharing right now. Yeah, because Carol is mentioning volume 2. We've only published the first 13 stories in volume 1, and there were 8 more stories in that 1918 article. We'll publish those, and then yeah, APS, we found 8 more stories in Penobscot that Frank Speck never published in Penobscot. I think he published most of them in English. So this will be the first time that they'll be coming out.
So how many will be in volume 2?
Volume 2 is going to have 16 stories.
Oh.
And the one thing that is different, I think maybe you could see it from the pages, the Penobscot Nation has an orthography, a new orthography since 1980. Frank Speck, when he started collecting back in 1910, did not have that. He sort of made up his own seat of the pants way of writing Penobscot. And so this book is actually the first book published using the contemporary Penobscot orthography. And Conor Quinn's work has been, really important in transferring the Frank Speck versions into the new contemporary orthography that he and Carol both worked on refining.
Yes.
So let's see. Carol, did you have more thoughts, or do you want?
Well, I was just thinking of what Stephen Krashen said, if you can read a language, you can speak it. And that's how I came into this, through working for Frank Seaver in 1982, I believe I started. And my job was to compile and type on, through index cards on a page, pages for the dictionary. And I matched it up, almost a subconscious level, what I heard people speaking, and it was mostly Passamaquoddy, but it helped me with Penobscot. My grandmother was Passamaquoddy, and I've heard words throughout my life, you know, in the family, and I also lived there in 72, but I think that just helped me come into the Penobscot, you know, and I had left work in 85 to attend college, finished in 1990, because I wanted to teach Penobscot, which meanwhile, they said that anyone who has their language didn't have to have a teaching degree, but I'm glad that I did that at UMO at RNO because I learned a lot about American school and Stephen Krashen, and I knew that we were in a different situation where our mother tongue is our second language. So I was drawn to second language learning methodologies. And there was a man on campus that I talked to quite often that helped me with that. So I've used those ways in my teaching. When I taught Penobscot at Indian Island School in 96, I taught language till 2001, I believe. And then I worked for the department and I recorded a lot of the stories. But that's how I came into it, you know, and I had some language, but not much on board, you know, when I came in. So it's been a process, and that's my hope with this book, is that someone will be able to read these and, you know, will be able to speak our language to some degree. So this is real treasure for me. I'm just so excited about our project and what we've done and what will happen, because our user-friendly dictionary will be out probably around the same time. I mean, this is an ongoing process because we have volume 2. So it's quite exciting for me, and so glad that Conor's here and get to see his process. And what a gift, you know, it's really a gift.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So a good segue to you, Conor.
Okay. So as you've heard already, our goal there were a lot of goals in this book, but one of the big goals in putting this book together was to kind of first and foremost make a resource for kids and families that are looking to reclaim the everyday use of their language. And also at the same time get that direct, in the language itself, access to Penobscot literature, so that people can really start to not always have to depend on the English translation, but can start to understand the Penobscot language story directly. So real goal was to have a very dynamic document for language reclamation, and not just sort of a book that kind of sits on the shelf and is like good to have, but sits on the shelf. So we were really, in laying out the book and figuring out how to present or represent these stories, we were really looking to prevent the tendency for people to kind of open the book, look at the Penobscot spelling, look at everything and get overwhelmed, and then just kind of be like, well, that's good, and then put it back on the shelf. Or worse yet, look at the book and feel like they can read the English translations, and that's great, but somehow never be able to engage with the Penobscot language itself. So our goal was to do everything to prevent that from happening and make it really possible for kids and families, especially, and people in schools, to really engage with the Penobscot language itself. And a lot of that, our guiding principle, was to do everything we could do to make this book not be what it might otherwise have been. That is to say, make it not technical, make it not academic, because there's so much history of these kinds of material. Literally, the first publication of this was for a academic technical audience, which made it very hard for people to use for themselves. So you'll notice in the layout of the book that there's no footnotes in the text, right? Therefore, so that, you know, which can be a bit off-putting for a second grader trying to read if there's footnotes at the bottom of the page. There are, in fact, big, giant, nerdy linguistic notes way at the end of the book, and an appendix at the end of the book for all the fussy questions of, like, what did the original manuscript say? Which vowel might this have actually been, or would it maybe this vowel? There's all kinds of that, but it's at the end of the book for the readers who want to deal with that. It's not sort of stuck in front of the face of everybody else who wants to read the book just as stories and directly as learners. There are some general reader notes at the ends of each chapter that Carol and Margo and sometimes me picked out to sort of help help readers understand a point of the story that might have been a little bit tricky, just as it said, something that might have been understood by Newell Lyon's audience, but isn't as widely known now, or to help people make some connections between something in the story, some part of the story, and especially for Penobscot students, kids, and their everyday life, things they already know about in their own current Penobscot life. So the layout of the book is all towards this kind of accessibility. And towards that, we also created two reader guides. Hold on one sec. We created two reader guides. One is on patterns of what we call patterns of relation. And if you take a look at this, if you glance at it real quickly, where we're talking about patterns of language, it might make people think this is going to be all grammar-y and like, all right, just gonna skip that and move on to the stories and so forth. But if you look closer at this small section of the book, you'll see that there are no grammar terms at all and no charts of conjugations, nothing like that. We're just comparing words, showing their relationships, showing how the words relate to each other in their meaning and how you say them, focusing on how every bit of the language is just straightforwardly related to every other bit. And you also see in this section that every language point in here that we lay out is tied directly to phrases, things that people say in the stories themselves, examples from the stories, to make it clear, especially for kids, how these explanations of basic parts of the language relate to really directly understanding and using the language, understanding the stories themselves, and then using that same kind of a line from a story to help say something in your everyday life. So for example, for this one, if you can close your eyes for a second and don't look at what we're going to show you and just do this by ear. One of the points we do in this section is about the word gigawis, which means your mother. We have a little bit that teaches you gigawis, it means your mother. Nigawis means my mother. Gigawis is your mother. Nigawis is my mother. And then from there, if Gigawis is your mother, Nigawis is my mother, then Nukumus is my grandmother. And so Gulkumus is your grandmother. And we talk about that in those terms, like we lay it out that way. Because you notice when we talk about it that way, you can look now. We notice that it's all relationships of whole words. We don't need to talk about prefixes and suffixes and first person, second person. We don't need to talk about any of that. We just say Gigawis means your mother, Nigawis means my mother, and then give people a chance to sort of follow through how that would obviously make sense for Nukumis is my grandmother, Gulkumis is your grandmother, Nukumis is my grandmother, right? It's a relationship of whole words. Comparing whole words does all that you need to do, which means this kind of approach can work for learners of any age. Even kids before they can read, or they're still learning to read, or not clear on the Penobscot spelling system yet, it can be entirely oral, right? Notice I asked you guys to close your eyes so you could do it just by ear. And sometimes it's, especially if you're a parent teaching your kid your language through this book, it may be easier to read these examples out loud, say them out loud, let kids pick up on Gigawis is your mother, Gulkumis is your grandmother, Nigawis is my mother, Nukumis is my grandmother. Just pick it up out loud by ear, even though we presented it in a book. You don't need to read it first, although you as the parent may need to read it out loud first, but that's the point. Reading it out loud, bringing it back to life. And you'll see through the rest of this brief guide that it's just all about relations, right? We're literally talking about the relations of your mother, you to your mother, your mother versus my mother. And the language is so wonderfully set up that if you've learned Gigawis talks about you, and Gulkumus talks about you, Nigawis talks about you, Nokumus talks about you, that goes even further, because Golidahazi, you're happy, Golidahazi is talking about you, and Nolidahazi is talking about me. So a kid could learn Gigawis is your mother, Nigawis is my mother. Golidahazi is talking about you too. You're happy. Nolita Huzzy is talking about me, I'm happy. I'll say that one more time. So Gigawus is talking about you, your mother. Nigawus is talking about me, my mother. And then Golita Huzzy is talking about you, you're happy. And Nolita Huzzy is talking about me, I'm happy. And that can give kids a chance to, directly relate to the language. They're already able to talk about themselves, talk about me, talk about you. And at the same time, we can see this all coming together in the stories. There's actually a phrase in the story where Gluskabe says, Golome, you're right, talking about you. Golome, nokumi, talking about me, my mother, and my grandmother. So he says, Golome, nokame, you're right, my grandmother. So with just a few little patterns like this, and there's a bit more in following pages, kids can really start to understand the Penobscot language of the story directly. So, and that's what we've been trying to do is give up, everything in this book is designed to sort of make it as simple, straightforward, non-technical as possible to get a real beginning understanding of the language. We couldn't cover, of course, every fine detail of the Penobscot language, but a lot of the point of this reader's guide is to give beginners, Penobscot people who are looking at this book at home, who might be a bit shy to like go and take a language class because people get anxious about that, to look at these few points, work through the book a little bit and see them and feel like, oh, I could do this, and then go and take a language class with Carol and with Gabe, feeling, having that confidence to sort of, get over their fears and say, oh, I think I can do this. So that's what we're really trying to do there, is show in particular how much the Penobscot language is so relational, and the relations are very straightforward. Even when they're very non-English, they make a lot of sense taken on their own terms, and are very learnable. And we do the same thing with the sounds. Let me just hop you through the sounds. As I think Margo mentioned, the standard Penobscot writing system has been officially adopted by the Penobscot Nation since about the 1980s. It can look a bit intimidating at first. That's our first line there. And there are some features of it that are a little bit tricky. But the super good news is that what's essential about the sounds of the Penobscot language, and then from that, how they might get written, how they're currently written in this spelling system, is also, again, really straightforward. So for beginners, we highlight for them that there's only 6 vowel sounds. And these 6 words each happen to have the sounds twice in the word. So one of the sounds of the language is E, and the word mealy, which kids love to learn because it means gimme, mealy has that sound E twice. And then muzok, which means mooses, more than one moose, muzok has the U sound twice. And for the E sound, nehe, they have that twice, and so on and so forth. And what we can tell kids is if they're worried about, am I saying the word right or wrong? You say, well, if you know those 6 words, which sound do you think it is? Which sound of which word do you think it is when you're saying this new word and learning a new word? And they can almost always compare the sounds of the new word to one of these 6, and therefore come out really confident that they're saying the words right, that they're saying that they're catching the sounds of the language, because we've told them that like all you have to be able to do is do these 6 sounds and you're good. Even more important than this is especially since here we're presenting the stories in the form of a written book, right, which is new to the Penobscot, relatively new to the Penobscot tradition of storytelling. We feel that it's probably the most helpful and important thing to set learners up with the rhythm and the melody of the language, because rhythm and melody is the real heart and soul of any language. Right, and unfortunately, alphabets are not particularly good at representing rhythm and melody. I mean, we can write little accent marks all over everything, but even then, those are hard to read and translate into rhythm and melody. It turns out, though, one basic feature of Penobscot rhythm and melody is the basic rhythm of the often very long words, like a word like Wabanaki, meaning Wabanaki, the land, and actually the people as well. Wabanaki, if you hear that rhythm that goes da 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 da, or da 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 da, it kind of goes up third from the end. Wabanaki, Wabanaki, or a word like town or settlement, village. Udane still goes up. Udane goes up, and then and then 2 more beats after that. And when it looks a little bit like math and algebra on the page where we lay it out, but as you can see, we're just trying to highlight Wabanaki, you go up there. You go up on the ba. Udene, you go up on the u. And a very important word, Wijukami, you go up on the ju. Wijukami. And if you hear those three words, Wabanaki, Udene, Wijukami, that's like what we know to be the kind of fundamental rhythm and melody of the Penobscot language. All the words also go up at the end. Wabanaki, they go up. Udene, they go up a little on the end as well, which is the exact opposite of English. If you say this with an English accent, it would be like Wabanaki, Udene, Wijukemi, right? Where it just drops down at the end. That's English accent. And Frank Siebert, who helped us all so much in all of this work, he was the one who got corrected by Susie Dana, who said, your pronunciation's pretty good, but you keep going down at the end. That doesn't sound right. And then once he learned, and once she pointed out to him that you have to go up at the end, she said, oh, now you sound like you're speaking Penobscot. So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to put in this, to really emphasize in the beginner's guide, that these, just a couple key features of rhythm and melody that gives learners a lot of confidence and heart. It gives them the ability to say the words with feeling, because when you know where you go up on the word, that's when you can say the word with your feeling, your emotion. You can say Wabanaki or Wabanaki or Wabanaki, right? Depending on how you feel when you say that word. But if you don't know where the rhythm and melody goes, then it's hard to, you're just kind of reading the word and you don't know how to put your heart into it, basically. So that gives people the ability to really breathe life back into the words. And that's what we're really hoping to do. Carol, sorry.
Good point. You want me to read something or?
Yeah, so that's so that segues into our next bit, where I'm gonna need to hop down to page 150 far. I'm reminded how many pages there are in this book. And Sozuk, wait, that's not right. I jumped ahead. Nogodas.
There it is.
Yes, Nogodas.
So each of our stories is only numbered. There, we don't give it a title either in Penobscot or English. Frank Speck, back in the 19-teens, had written his own English titles, but instead the stories are numbered and the number is given in Penobscot. And each story begins with one of these illustrations.
So here I'll move on to the, oops, sorry, I have to change the view on this, two-page view. There we go. Oops, wait, how did I manage to skip that? There we go. Nogodas. All right, now let's make it visible.
Yeah, let's make it visible.
All right. All right, is that good for you, Carol?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I'm just gonna shrink it a little so they can see all these. Oh.
You want me to start? Gluskabe wadilan okamasil nikwab nukame nagwilawi walitan danej gosaznawak wajiata sagahadi hadik Elmaus heated nigani nikwab nabosan Debinawitan sibawal nagamekwazabemal nikwab ach nasipgila nukami. Did you want me to read the English or just the Penobscot?
I guess, can you, I assume the readers can probably, our audience can probably see the English, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that it?
No, I switched to the next page.
Yeah, this is the second page.
Oh, this is the second page.
Yeah.
Yanak Muzak Sahigach, my favorite line. Don't worry. No Wabozan Wamaji Majabian Mezi Wabiti Lal Nal Sibawal Sakadatuk Wagil Sobaguk with the Benawitanal Dama Sagiga Olitan Elmi Bantagwigak Wajij Ata Aduji Saga Hadik Oses Nigani Mesiach Beji Waniganal Wigizi Musikda Hamanal Waji Walautasik Malamta Besquan Sibu Bidi Biet Nbanek bunag woodol wageda guaton nete adali banapsquilag esqua niquapte.
And there you can see the notes to the story. And they, explain something about the relationship of the words to the action, the verb for carry, that stands for portage, where you do carry a canoe over land. And then we also occasionally give you the notes that Frank Speck put, because sometimes he and Newell Lyon actually wanted to locate you in a place in the Don land. So the story really tells the kind of thing that Gluskabe was up to in his process of maturing, taking on tasks that would help make this place livable, and in this case, make the rivers and falls navigable for his descendants.
Oh, there was one thing I wanted to mention about, as you guys can see, as we've gone through the layout, where you have the whole phrase and then the whole English, and then one by one. One of the things you can do with your kids is that there are some very distinctive and unique words all the way through, but there are some expressions that just come back again and again, like molam te, eventually, finally, molam te. And one of the kind of games you can play with your kids is see how many of them they can kind of recognize and discover again. Oh, there's molam te, meaning eventually, and so forth. Bezagwen you'll see a lot because it means one. Zebu you'll definitely see a lot because it means river, and so forth. And setting it up this way, we want to help it so that help kids so that they can really start to get familiar with all the really common words in the language, which lay them a foundation to like kind of understand what's basically going on in the story. And then from there, they can kind of zero in on more specific words that, like Winigan, all the portages, and learn them first. So they can kind of get the lay of the land, the background, the landscape, and then move in to the specifics.
I'm so proud of us. Alida Hamel, Gilwa.
Yes, Ted.
Nalita Hazi.
Yeah.
Yes,
So I think that's that's our introduction to you, to our book, which we hope is imminently purchasable from University of Massachusetts Press and Amazon everywhere and all of those things. But we know that you have questions, and Star has very kindly volunteered to help us field the questions and give you responses.
Absolutely. And thank you all so much for sharing the work that you've been doing. And there's definitely a lot of work that's gone into this. I can tell just by your presentation. The first question we actually have for you is, could you share with us the philosophy and inspiration behind the idea of making sure that every Penobscot household has a copy of this book?
Well, yeah. For my feeling about it, and I know that Carol must have her own feelings too about it, that as long as this book has come into being so much for the purpose of giving access to traditional language to young people today who may all be growing up in English, it only makes sense to find money to make sure that every household gets the book. There are all kinds of ways that it makes sense to me to make sure that's who gets it first, right?
Yeah, for the children, for the family, because part of this that happened is storytelling in the home. You know, I had people here and we read the stories because somewhere I read that this is our cosmogony that fuels your universe and keeps it going. These stories were told in winter. So if every house has a book, then they can tell the stories. And long ago, certain clans had certain stories, and you had to have permission from the people to tell that story, which I had permission from Sipsis long ago to tell these stories because she's related to Newell Lyon, and I want to mention her also. I'm thinking of Nolan too, a fish in every mailbox. You know, that's how the people were in the story about tobacco. Grandmother says, we are all out of tobacco, and someone has all the tobacco and he's hoarding it. Gluskabe goes and takes it and just distributes it to everybody. So I think in that vein too, along with our values, we want to give the books out to everybody we can.
Yeah, and it this publication process, we kind of had to teach the press, the University of Massachusetts Press, what we wanted, and our contract process had a bit of a negotiation because we wanted the copyright to be held by Penobscot Nation Office of Cultural and Historic Preservation. That wasn't too hard to arrange, but then there was this moment where there's a clause in the contract that says that anybody who wants to do something else with the material in the book has to talk to people at UMass Press. And I said, no, no, no. What you really need to have in that clause is that those people need to come to the Penobscot Nation to ask if they want to make a movie, if they want to animate, if they want to tape record, whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's like a return to the people. I mean, that's where all this came from, a return and an honor to the people.
We have another question. Somebody said, I noticed that you have indicated that this is volume 1. Does that mean that there are more stories to come?
Definitely.
yeah, volume 2, we have we've got money for it. There's been very generous support for these 2 projects, and as we said, the volume 2 is going to have the rest of the stories from the 1918 International Journal of American Linguistics article, plus these 8 stories that we found at American Philosophical Society, which are going to see the light of day in Penobscot for the first time.
Yes.
And then this question is for Carol or Connor. It says, how much revision from what Frank Speck wrote did you have to do to make a closer translation to Newell Lyon's Penobscot version?
Connor can answer that better.
Okay.
I would say it was probably more than I thought. I always remember in going through that, by and large, our understanding of the Penobscot language comes from all different sources, right? Carol has worked with so many speakers. I actually never really got to work with the most fluent speaker, who was one of Carol's great teachers, Madeline Shea. She passed away before I ever got involved with the Penobscot language. But we all sort of do what we can and the best we can. And I remember as we go through that, one of the things is we did try to just take sort of words like molomte eventually and just translate them consistently so that learners could get them through, whereas Speck wasn't really concerned with that. And then for other translations, there are definitely a few spots through all 13 stories. There was a spot here and a spot there where it's like, whoa, Speck just missed that, right? But luckily through the other sources are other teachers, basically, which includes not just the teachers from Penobscot, but teachers of the Wastagwell language and Passamaquoddy language, and even as far afield as Wabanaki and Mi'kmaq. All of the people we've worked with have helped us put some of these Penobscot phrases where we had kind of no other source in a broader Wabanaki context, which helped kind of clarify translations. Luckily, we didn't have a whole lot of cases where like, well, clearly Speck just like, he was out of his mind. What was he thinking there? Just a few spots where he kind of, you'd expect a person who's not a native speaker of the language to make a few slip ups, to say the least. I think he must have worked fairly well checking and rechecking with Newell Lyon, because by and large, most of the I'd say 80+% of the translations jibe with everything else from non-Speck sources quite well. And there are just some hiccups, as you would expect, and so forth. Most of my issues with Speck's like accuracy are less in how he transcribed the language and more in like his introduction to his publication, where he draws all kinds of conclusions and has his own like story to tell about what the stories mean and don't mean and so forth. But it seemed like when he was like taking stuff down from Newell Lyon, he was pretty careful and meticulous, and kind of only made the level of mistakes you'd kind of expect from someone in his position, which is work we had to do, and still leaves us with some unanswered questions. That's why if you look at the back of the book at all the notes, those are all our unanswered questions about things we're still not quite sure of, and hope that someday, maybe with more work and more younger people learning the language and kind of working it out from inside the language themselves, and even more collaboration between all the different Wabanaki peoples who all speak such closely related languages, that some of these remaining questions can also get resolved. It never really ends, this process of trying to understand the language and the languages better.
Right. One of the things that we had to keep saying as we were, trying to actually finish the book, get it, done, was we can't answer that question. Let's hope somebody younger and smarter than us is, learning the language out there. I mean, there are a number of Wabanaki people, now taking degrees in linguistics and really studying their own home languages. And, the hope is that scholars will come after and help work out the things that we couldn't work out.
Yeah.
And I know Carol has to leave soon, so I'm just going to end it with one last question. Are there plans to create an audiobook to accompany this?
I wish there was.
Well,
I don't know.
you've recorded them, haven't you?
Yeah, with the department.
Yeah, so there isn't a link right now, but I think that's something that we need to construct, is so that
Yeah, that was the big idea.
yeah, you can get an ebook version of our book, and I don't know what they do with the Penobscot words on the page. No one has come to us from UMass Press to ask about that, but that's a whole other piece.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have that, because at that time, because our speakers were scattered, there's no consistent trail there for, language, and that we should leave some tracks for those who are to follow.
Well, I want to thank you for hosting this talk today for everybody, and I want to thank the audience for attending. And I hope you all have a really great weekend. And if you're interested in learning more or looking for more resources that you can use in the classroom or elsewhere, please visit us at abbemuseum.com or .org. My apologies.
Thank you.
Thanks.